The title of tonight's talk is Designing Gardens in a Changing Climate. And I want you to know something. I could speak for hours and hours on this subject. But the really good news is that I'm only going to speak for about 40 minutes. My talk will encompass soils, plants, biodiversity, hard landscaping, and SUDS. That's an acronym for Sustainable Drainage Systems. I'm going to look at the contribution that gardens can make to managing our carbon dioxide and other emissions. And I will also make quite a lot of connections to other issues, such as our local natural history and the wider landscape. And you know what? I'm not going to start at the start. I'm going to start at the end. There's a chap called Daniel Covey who wrote a book, I think it was titled something like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in that book, it taught me a lesson that I've never forgotten, and that is always start at the end. And that's, of course, true of garden design. You'll see why. So here we go. I'm going to start at the end. Because this is the very world which is the world of all of us. The place in which, in the end, we find our happiness. Or not at all. And when William Wordsworth wrote those words in the prelude, I'm not sure he would have been thinking about climate change. But he was thinking about where we make our happiness. And the one thing that bothers me about climate change is, are we making our world happy or not? Because happiness is one thing that we want, isn't it, in life? And certainly when I'm designing a garden, one of my arch objectives, one of my main goals, is to make my client happy. I wouldn't be in business if I didn't. So let's have a quick look and just see what we know about climate change, shall we? Well, first of all, our CO2 levels are rising. I mean, you know, we started off at the end of the 19th century with something like 278 parts per million. When I was born, it was 356 parts per million, and just this year, we're looking at 421 parts per million. There's going to be an increase in extreme weather events. Our seas, our oceans are in trouble. Ecosystem collapse and climate change are just different sides of the same coin. It's a sort of heads and tails thing. They work in partnership. We absolutely know, because it's happened before in the 4.6 billion years of this Earth's existence, that we will reach a tipping point. And that's when some sort of system dynamic changes irreversibly. We also know that we live on a finite planet. It hasn't got infinite resources. It never will have. So we need to treat it as such. There's also this incredible psychology that seems to have built up around climate change. Do you know about bystander syndrome? You know, it's when people take out their mobile phones if there's a traffic accident, and they'd much rather film it rather than actually, you know, do something about the traffic. And then they wait for a first aider or a first responder to come in and actually deal with the product of the traffic accident, you know, the poor injured people. And it's a bit like that with climate change. I feel that, you know, our global community, whatever that means, is kind of in bystander mode. It's just watching it all happen and isn't really reacting to it. And then, of course, there's a whole systematic denial and the whole denial of climate change, and that used to bother me a lot. It bothers me less now, because when I gave a similar lecture to the Hartford About Climate Change group in 2021, I met a wonderful lady called Sandra White, and she educated me and schooled me in denial psychology. So I know a lot more about it than I did do then. And Stanley Cohen, who did the original work on Holocaust denial, we sort of learned from him. And denial is a survival instinct. It's absolutely a survival instinct. So I do understand now that climate change deniers go through a process where literally a shutter comes down in their mind, because they just can't deal with it. It's too much, and I do understand that. And I think part of our job is to just try to lift that shutter a bit, maybe drill little holes through the shutter and ask them to peer through, without taking too many risks. But we need to get through to the climate change deniers. Oh, and then there's doomerism. Well, what's doomerism? Well, I suppose it's when people say, oh yeah, climate change is happening, but can't do anything about it because nobody can do anything about it. It's inevitable. Well, it isn't. Let's be the voice of hope. Oh, and one last thing that really got my goat about 6 or 7 years ago is impartiality. We can't be impartial about climate change. It's as nearest as we get to cause and effect science, okay? And I was listening to the International Panel on Climate Change's report about 6 or 7 years ago on Radio 4. Turn the radio on, I'm listening to this report, and it was really serious stuff about what's going on in relation to climate change. So they go off the air. Who should come on but Nigel Lawson, arch climate change denier, just for reasons of impartiality. What? It's like having someone on talking about antibiotics and having someone say, well, actually, they don't work. Do you know what I mean? It's just stupid. What's the point? We haven't got time for this. And if we just take a casual look back in 22,000 years, do you remember that back then? No, good. Can you see that spike right at the end? I was hoping to be able to sort of go around the corner and point at it, but I don't think even I can reach it, even though I'm quite tall. But can you see the spike? You are here, top right. That's all what we call anthropogenic climate change. That's all stuff the human race have caused. Okay, you'll clock that. That's good. Or maybe it isn't so good. So, as a garden designer and someone who tonight is representing the garden design industry, we've got a few problems to deal with, haven't we? Oh dear. Challenges for the garden design industry. Well, here we go. We've got to keep our emissions low. We've got to keep the pests and pathogens that are assailing us from entering the system. What's the system? Well, it could be our country, it could be a biological system, someone's garden. There's a lot of work we do in the entire industry, because the garden design industry is more than just garden designers. It's nurseries, it's suppliers. There's a lot of work that goes on controlling pests and pathogens. We need to create regenerative landscapes. I'll go into that a bit more, not degenerative landscapes. Regenerative landscapes are those that are self-willed, basically, that they kind of manage themselves. I'll go into this a bit more. Degenerative landscapes are those that have high inputs of chemicals and energy and stuff like that. We need to use the 5 R's. Now, I'm going to test you on this in a very short period of time, so you need to remember: refuse, reduce, reuse, repurpose, recycle. Okay. Ex-school teacher standing up here. We like tests. No, we don't. We need to provide, as garden designers, we need to provide solutions for the industry and you, our clients. And this is why I'm here tonight, isn't it? To educate. I'm representing my industry tonight. Thank you again for the invite. We need to collaborate. Yeah? We need to engage with other organisations. We need to think carefully. We need to be rational. We need to mitigate climate change while working with only 2% of the UK's land mass. Well, let's have a look at that. The Royal Horticultural Society, in their two gardening and climate change reports of the last decade, have indicated that gardens in the UK take up about 2% of the UK's land mass. Well, I'm not aware that garden designers are working on the whole of that 2%, are you? So we only work with a tiny fraction of that 2%. So it's like, well, what can we really do? You know? Well, we can actually do quite a lot. We're only working with a small amount. So this is where the collaboration comes in and engagement comes in and the education comes in, because we need your help. We all need to be working together. And we need to make connections, and we need to keep an open mind as well, I think. Here's something for you. This is what I was saying earlier. The nurseries in this country, and we've got a fantastic heritage of nurseries in this country, are working with the garden design industry, and the garden design industry is working with the nurseries. Why would that be? I'm not talking garden centres here, I'm talking nurseries. It's because they supply good plants. It's because they give great advice. First thing I do is if I'm organising a planting plan for clients, is I phone up a couple of my favourite nurseries, go along and talk to them face to face if they're fairly local. You know, what have you got in stock? What would work well in this design? Look, here's my plan. Get the plan out, you know, the bit of paper. Oh yeah, Simon, I think this could work quite well for you. Oh look, I haven't got any of that this year. What? You haven't got any of that? But that went really well last year. Okay, I'll have to go somewhere else. And then you get loads and loads of advice on structural plants that you can see in this image, you know, the trees and stuff like that. And you know they work really, really hard at pathogen control. So every plant that's imported has to have a plant passport. Those plants probably get through the ports quicker than you would, thanks to Brexit. Oh, did I say that? And we don't buy plants unless they're peat-free grown. This is a really tough one, because our entire country is dragging its heels over this idea that we shouldn't use peat. And the government literally announced on Monday morning that they're putting back the ban on peat sales even further now for another whole decade. That's under pressure from the landscape industry. I mean, I'm talking about nurseries being good, yeah? But here's the bad side. I've been to one nursery, which I won't name because they're not here to defend themselves. It's in Cambridgeshire. And we said, oh, what's that over there? Oh, that's the huge pile of peat. I mean, huge pile of peat. So they've trashed an Irish bog somewhere, haven't they, or a Scottish bog somewhere to do this. That's going to go for a pot. What? We didn't know. We thought you were peat-free. We said to them, oh, no, well, it's just a resource like any other resource, so it's there to use whenever we want. Well, I just don't understand that. A bit more about that later. But we do need to go peat-free. So I'm looking for zero peat use. Can't always find it, but I really do try to avoid buying plants that have been grown in peat or trading with any outlets that sell peat. And we're not alone in the garden design industry, are we? Because you have your own challenges in the Hartford Civic Society. I mean, this is your vision from your website. It's absolutely superb, I think. Is it 1969 you've been going? Yeah. And, you know, I can honestly say that since you started up, things have just got worse and worse and worse. And I look at myself, and I shouted at the ceiling. It was about 5 years ago, I remember it. And my wife said to me, what's up? And I said, I've been trying to improve this world for the whole of my life. And since I've been working on it, it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. I must personally be responsible for this, because the harder I try, the worse it gets. And isn't that a shame when we need to collaborate and engage, make connections and work together? So it's the working together, I think, that's going to get us through this, because we can't do it on our own. And that brings me to an Oxford University professor, Kate Raworth. This is her idea from a book, Donut Economics. 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. And you may well be surprised that I'm talking about economics, but we all have to be economists now to live on a finite planet. And the reason for that is if you look at the 2 dark green circles, can you see the outer one, the ecological ceiling? Yeah? And then there's the inner one, the social foundation. Well, the social foundation, if you fall into the white centre, yeah, then you're not providing enough water, food, health services, energy, peace and justice, income and work, social equity, all that sort of stuff. So you need to be working above that inner dark green circle, yeah? But if you go too far outwards, when you're trying to provide all those social services, you overshoot the ecological ceiling, yeah, the outer dark green circle. And you start acidifying the oceans, you start polluting the air, you're withdrawing too much water from the water-bearing rocks below our feet. And remember, we get about 95% of our water from our water-bearing rocks in Hertfordshire, so this is quite a serious problem. So we need to live in the space and operate in the space that is the light green circle between the 2 dark green rings. Are you all with me? Yeah. And that's called the safe and just space for humanity. And I feel tonight, in this eco church, with its LED lights they were telling me about earlier, that we're feels that we're in a safe and just space for humanity tonight, which is great. And Kate Raworth says that the economic performance should be judged by the extent to which the needs of the people are met without overshooting the Earth's ecological ceiling. So with all that in mind, let's just move on and let's just see how the garden design industry can work within that just and safe space. Well, we can look at the contribution that gardens can make to managing our CO2 and other emissions. How does the garden design industry minimise its emissions? And what are the connections to other issues such as our natural history and the wider landscape? So if a garden is being designed, what should it be? Well, it should reflect the design brief. So what's that? Well, I listen to the client and I take the brief off the client. I have a think about what I can add to that, what I can bring to the show, bring to the mix, and I produce a design brief. Give it back to the client. When they're happy with it, it gets signed off and dated. That's the brief that I work to. So all the gardens that I design, and any garden designer designs, should have a design brief written by the garden designer. Any designed garden should go through a recognised process, say the site survey and the site analysis. A site survey is everything you can measure, yeah? How tall the trees are, what's the spread of the canopy of the trees, how tall the fences are, what the orientation is on the compass, how big it is, what the square meterage is, all that sort of thing. Levels are very, very important. Any changes of levels need to be recorded, even on a flat site, believe it or not. So site survey is everything you can measure. Site analysis is everything you can't measure. So it's like, what's the sunniest spot in the garden or something like that, or do they have dogs? Very important. We need to take, any design garden needs to take account of the surrounding landscape. Now, I did say I was going to test you. Come on. Okay, reuse, recycle, refuse, I heard. Reduce. Fantastic. 100%. There is hope for the human race after all. Magnificent. Well done, everyone. Design gardens should be regenerative. We need to manage water sustainably. They must have permeable surfaces. We need to get that water going into the ground. So it infiltrates at the surface, percolates down to the bedrocks, replenishes our water-bearing rocks where we get all our drinking water from. We need to sculpt the land for water retention and biodiversity. We need to improve soil health, combining carbon into the soil so we don't release it into the atmosphere. Talk about that a bit more in a minute. We should use local and native species where we can. We need to avoid the 3 Ps: peat, plastic and pesticides. And you can see that us garden designers have a hell of a lot to think about, don't we? I can't talk about everything tonight, but what I will do is to talk about those 6 things. Okay, got that? Great. So this is soil. Just have a look at the colour of that soil a minute. Let me ask you a question. Is it sort of very light and therefore low in nutrient, or is it a very dark soil and therefore high in nutrient? What would you say? It's very light coloured. It's a really good thing to be able to do to tell how much nutrient you've got in your soil just from the colour of the soil. It's really good to sort of get your hands on the soil in that respect. So with soil, we're always trying to improve soil health. And what I will say is a lot of landscapers and contractors need tutoring on this, because they end up, if you're not careful, compacting the soils. I'm looking to my colleague Verity, by the way, who works with me very closely, who's going to join me for questions at the end. And we really have to work very hard with some of our contractors to make sure that they don't compact soil on sites. But we need to improve soil health, incorporate carbon into the soil where we can. We need to use mulches, and you can help by making your own compost, of course. Now, this pair of images shows the use of well-rotted bark mulch after a new planting. And this is a very successful product that we use. It came in, like big sort of ton bags or cubic metre bags, and this was applied straight after new planting. You can tell it's new planting because it hasn't sort of quite grown into position yet, has it? Lots of spaces in between. But this has lasted for 2 winters already on this site, which is now full of plants. All the plants have grown out to their heights and spreads pretty much, and there's much less need for the bark mulch there, but it's still there doing its job of suppressing weeds, maybe holding water into the soil, that kind of thing. So, use of mulches is very, very important. Of course, you're digging less, so you're actually incorporating carbon gradually into the soil rather than releasing it, which is great. And it's well-rotted bark mulch. It's a product of the arboricultural industry, so we're recycling. We're not using peat or anything else in the soils to improve it. And why use peat at all? I mean, why should we destroy one landscape to maintain another? If we destroy that bog landscape, we're going to lose our sundews. I don't know if you know, but there's at least 3 different species of sundew. The round-leaved, the long-leaved, the intermediate one. And then there's bog asphodel, there's butterworts, all those things you like seeing when you go to these nice sort of wild places in the Lake District or Scotland or North Wales or wherever you go. So, I'm saying this ad nauseum now, aren't I? But, no peat or peat-based products, please. And if you're interested, Garden Organic has got a good website. So have Dogwood Days, not listed here, but Dogwood Days are listing all the nurseries that don't sell peat or peat-related products. And I thought I'd do a bit of research, as you do on a Saturday when you've got nothing better to do. I think you might be able to tell which high street shop I went to do my research. So I went in, and I I went straight to the compost on the shelves. There's this sign saying, you know, we sell peat-free compost. I'm thinking, oh, this is good for a major high street retailer. And then I kind of noticed on the way in that there were bigger bags, much bigger bags of compost by the door. So you can't miss them on the way in and on the way out. And if you look very closely, I've got watering, feeding, and then composition. Can you see it? If you look at composition, it says this product contains 40% peat. What's the point? You know, and you can see what we're working against here. And there were 3 people standing next to me, and being a scientist, I thought, oh, I'll just do a little bit of research here. I said to them, oh, are you interested in what's in this peat? No. They weren't interested. Not interested in the slightest. So anyway, there we go. Still on soils, and you can see here I'm working with Richard, one of my drivers that sometimes works with us on more major products, and we're creating a meadow here. And do you remember I asked you if the soil was very light coloured or dark coloured in one of my other images? And we said it was very light coloured. Well, it's very important if you're trying to create things like meadows in areas that you take out the nutrients from the top of the soil if you can. There are ways of establishing meadows on higher nutrient soils, but unfortunately the higher nutrient levels feed the grasses, which outcompete your nice pretty wildflowers. Does that make sense? I can see a couple of nodding heads. A couple of you already know this. So what we do is we do turf stripping. Now, on a large area, you need to do it with a digger and a dumper truck. You know, we make habitats out of the topsoil that we've turf stripped. Only take off, you know, a few centimetres, just down to the base of the sort of grassy roots, that's all. And so you get these really nice high nutrient banks that are really good for insects like spiders. I mean, they spin their webs within moments. Have you ever piled soil up on a sort of sunny day and then seen the spider's web's reflection almost within moments? I don't know where they come from sometimes. But, you know, it's really good for spiders, these topsoil banks we do. Very good for other invertebrates like solitary wasps and mining bees and stuff like that. So, you know, we do all that. And the lower nutrients ensures the success of the flowering. And this is the kind of result you get. You can see I'm sweep netting here in an oxeye daisy rich meadow. This meadow is probably about 3 to 4 years old from memory, and I'm working with some school kids there. You can see in the bottom left slide there. So you catch all your invertebrates in the sweep net and tip them into the big white tray, and you can all go and have a look. And you know, the things you find again are spiders, lots and lots of flies, by the way, which is great because I used to love working with kids as a school teacher because you tip the net into the tray, they'd all stick their heads down, all these flies would go up in their face and they'd go, ah, you know, they'd all be scared. And you know, occasionally you get things like the bee orchid in the top left turn up on these sites, and it's a real fillip to the work that we do. Now I've got a question for you. This is a meadow, yeah? Okay, ready? Anyone fancy? You've got 100% already, so I'm not going to take any marks off because you're a wonderful group. But is this a meadow or not? Simple yes or no will do. Well, I'll put you out of your misery. It is not a meadow. It's an area of land with annuals on it. So a meadow, I'd define it roughly speaking as a grassland with perennials, yeah? Okay, roughly speaking. Whereas these are annuals. I mean, you can see the poppy, yeah? You all know the poppy, that's an annual, isn't it? It's found in arable land. The yellow one, corn marigold, yeah? It's an annual. The white one is a chamomile daisy. It's an annual. So these are all annuals. There's, again, I can't really point it out very easily to you, but in the middle at the top, can you see that bud that hasn't opened yet with the tiny little blue tip? That's a cornflower waiting to open. Really bright blue, fantastic things. It's an archaeophyte, it's not a native. I can explain the definition under questioning later if you want. It just means basically it's been here for a long time. It's probably brought in by Neolithic tourists. Very important that you understand this, because a lot of even the top garden designers describe this as a meadow, and it really makes me annoyed. It is not. These are all cornfield annuals, okay? Very, very rare habitat now to find all these things. The best example is near Coney Heath, by the way, which one of our best Hertfordshire naturalists found about 25 years ago. Graham White used to work for the Trust. Don't know if anyone knows that name. Now works for the RSPB and travels the world. Okay, moving off from soils now onto plants. This is one of our showiest plants, the meadow cranesbill, Geranium pratense. Native plants are beautiful. So, I hope you'll go along with my humorous yuck there for Spanish bluebells. I need to explain myself what I've got it in for the Spanish bluebell. Well, I suppose the direction I'm coming from is, as a garden designer, is we've sort of trashed our natural environment enough for my liking. So if we're going to plant bluebells, let's plant our native ones. I personally think our native ones are nicer than the Spanish ones. You can tell the difference because all the heads of a native bluebell all nod to one side. Yeah, they've got creamy anthers and they're this sort of indigo colour of my sweatshirt here. Spanish bluebells, the bluebells just nod on both sides, generally speaking. So what's the problem? And they're a much lighter colour, of course, more sort of lilac-y colour. So what's the problem? Well, the trouble is the Spanish bluebells hybridise freely with our native bluebells. So it kind of dilutes the gene pool. And when I go out with the Heart's Flora group, which we do about 6 or 7 times a year, we're starting to find bluebells which apparently are native, but then when you look at them closely, you can start to see the odd Spanish bluebell gene in there. So, we need to protect our native plants, which after all have grown up with us and are probably going to be, adapted to climate change, we hope. We need to protect them. Okay, here's another one. This will be a bit contentious with someone, I'm sure. But, what's wrong with weeds? This is one of my favourite weeds when you find it. It's a magnificent plant. Can you see just at the top there on the flower head the little black dots? So those are pollen beetles after the pollen. And this is a spear thistle, very common in our countryside, but just an absolutely magnificent plant and really important for our pollinators and for pollination to take place. That we provide some of these things, and much to the annoyance of people who live with me at home, sometimes I allow these things to sort of grow up, and they're quite a good size often, because they're worried about spreading throughout the garden and all this sort of stuff. But I often leave one there. I had a nettle there that was tall once, that was taller than me. God, they're fantastic when they get that tall. They really are. They've got these opposite leaves and that sort of thing. They're not always very stingy either, which is quite interesting. But anyway, this is a spear thistle, and what I tend to do, a lot of you gardeners will know this, is that just before, I wait for it to flower, so everyone gets the benefit, or everything gets the benefit of it, and then just chop the head off just before it goes to seed. And of course that tends to promote the other ones to open up. So, you can sort of manage these things reasonably well. So, what are we looking at here? Well, I'm now really getting on to the point where we need to, with climate change, we need to choose our plants to grow in our changing climate. So we're looking to different places in the world where we can obtain plants from that are drought tolerant. Yeah? All 3 of these plants imaged here are from North America, from the prairies. Top left, the yellow one, is Rudbeckia goldsturm. Top right is Echinacea purpurea, the purple coneflower. Oh, the Rudbeckia is black-eyed Susan, by the way. Some of you might know it as that. And at the bottom You know, we got another one, really good one, a helenium. So together, when these are planted, we can actually have a regenerating, self-willed ecosystem in our garden. They're all drought-tolerant plants, don't need any watering. And sometimes we call them prairie gardens, though often they're with other things as well, and it's not strictly speaking a prairie garden, but this is the sort of term we start to use. And the management is really quite low maintenance, because what you can do is let them flower. The flowers die off. You can leave the seed heads over the entire winter, so that's basically from October through to March. Things will live in the seed heads, and if you're not sure, just get a white piece of paper and just shake the seed head out over a white piece of paper. You'll soon find what's living in there. And then when you get down to your feet and you kind of look at these dead stems from the height they are right the way down to the bottom, when you see shoots around this time of the year in March, that's when you can just chop them down. And you can either remove the dead stems to your compost bin or compost heap or compost or whatever, or, and this is what Neil Lucas does down at Knoll Gardens, he just chops it down and uses it as part of the mulch, and it's gone within weeks. Okay. What you've got to understand is that as the stems hollow out as well, things will live in the stems, so it's quite good to sort of leave it as a mulch. So there you are, we're adding carbon, we're recycling nutrients, we're not digging, we've got a self-willed regenerative ecosystem. What is there not to like? And this is the same planting. Can you see in the right-hand image how dense the planting is? And this is before flowering. And then exactly the same spot, exactly the same plants as I've just shown you. On the left side, by the way, is a really good insect plant, the blue one, Nepeta. And in the foreground of the left-hand slide is a garden meadow that we created, which in its first year, when we cut it down in the autumn, we found 3 bank vole nests, which was great, wasn't it? Amazing little nests. Another way of avoiding having to water things is gravel gardens. Now, I quite like gravel gardens. I do come across clients who say, oh, gravel's not for me. My heart sinks a bit because I really like gravel gardens. This is a little one I did for a client in Welwyn Garden City. It's got the blue campanula, Poscia sciana in the front, and then it's got Erigeron daisies, which some of you will know, and then it's got things like the Glaucus Festuca glauca. Some of you, has anyone been to Beth Chatto's garden? Yeah, okay. I thought I'd get one or two of you. But this is Beth Chatto's gravel garden. Fantastic garden, a really good nursery, by the way. I don't buy much from it because it's quite a long way to go, isn't it, all the way over to Essex. But the tree in the middle is a really good one to plant in climate change. It's a bit of a thug, we call it in the industry. It's Eucalyptus gunnii. I've got a eucalyptus, not gunnii, but I have got a eucalyptus in my garden, and the rate of growth is just phenomenal. I've had it tree surveyed twice because I'm worried about it blowing over. It's so huge. Because I haven't got a very big garden, but it's absolutely fine. But these are really good trees to grow in our climate change. And I have to say, the eucalyptus I've got, at the time of year that it flowers, which is sort of late season, it's just teeming with insects. It is incredible, absolutely incredible. But yeah, Beth Chatto's garden is a really good one to go to for inspiration, and you can walk away with some of the plants as well, which is even better. And this is a little gravel garden I did for a client in Ardley. What have I got in there? I've got some lavenders, 2 types of Erigeron, Carvenscianis and sea breeze. I've then got 3 different types of Achillea, because I kind of had a little one and a medium one and then a tall one, and they all had slightly different flowering times as well, because I like sort of different heights and structures and that sort of thing. And these gravel gardens are really, really good for invertebrates. I mean, really, really good for invertebrates. So let's have a look at biodiversity next. What is it? Well, this is what it is. It's that, plus that, plus that. Yeah? and it's being destroyed. Generally speaking, all that biodiversity I just showed you is being destroyed by habitat degradation, pollution, exploitation, climate change, and invasive species and disease. So much so that just a few years ago, the International Union on Conservation for Nature said that 1 in 4 species are at risk of extinction. I think the rate we're looking at is 1 million lost species by 2050. And just in case I didn't depress you enough, here comes the Krellfeld study from Germany. Hallmann et al. They did a 26-year study on some German nature reserves. Insect rich, eh? Haha, not so insect rich now. They used malaise traps and found that there was a 76% decline in biomass. That's insect weight. Really, really serious stuff. This is all empirical evidence, you can see by the graphs that's shown there. And our own Professor Dave Goulson, anyone got any Dave's books? Dave Goulson's books, absolutely fantastic man. Does really good YouTube videos as well on sort of insects and stuff. But he reckons that we've lost 60% of our insects since 1980 in our country. And if you remember your sort of windscreen tests, you know, when we were much younger, you used to get loads of insects on your windscreen. You don't now, do you? Well, this is why. And these insects are important for as pollinators and for pollination. And I quote Dave Goulson now, "If insects continue to decline, expect some pretty dire consequences for ecosystems generally and for the human race." So what can us garden designers do? Well, I rocked up at a client in St Albans about a year ago, and they said, "Simon, I want you to redesign our front drive. We're fed up with it. It's a biodiversity desert. We don't like what's in our front drive in terms of the hard landscaping. And by the way," and I could not believe this, they said, "we want the water to infiltrate into the soil to replenish the chalk-bearing rocks below, the aquifer." Wow, I fell in love with those clients straight away. This is just one facet, and I will show you another facet in a minute, but this is just one facet of the design. Can you see this is a walk-in bin store that I've designed with a green roof? And on the right-hand side of it, this is what we've got. Now, the left-hand image shows one of the most aesthetically pleasing images I've seen for a long time. It is insect homes, but it's insect homes on steroids. It's like, you know when you see those little things, you know, the garden centres or in the store, it's much bigger than that, isn't it? So can you see my design on the right? I used a program called SketchUp to design this, by the way, because it has to be designed precisely to specify it and for costing purposes. But can you see I've mimicked that sort of Gothic shape? So we're going to have lots of insect homes in there, and we're going to have lots of fun with that. Aren't we, Verity, with putting canes and logs in there and all sorts? Yes. Now, if we really wanted to push the envelope, does anyone recognise this image from the Chelsea Flower Show just last year? It was a bit contentious. I couldn't wait to go and see this. Okay, so Rewilding Britain sponsored 2 garden designers, Urquhart and Hunt, to do a beaver garden. Because what had Urquhart and Hunt done down in Devon for their client, but suggested that one of the best ways that they could contribute towards our climate crisis and the biodiversity extinction crisis was to actually get beavers into their back garden. And the client said, yes. It's absolutely incredible this, isn't it? And this is the beaver garden. I was a bit peed off actually with Monty Don, if you don't mind me saying so, Monty, because he described this as not a garden. But correct me if I'm wrong. See the VIPs in the suit and the red on the left, yeah? They thought it was a garden. Can you see the hordes of people off to the right at the Chelsea Flower Show? They thought it was a garden. The Royal Horticultural Society thought it was a garden because it's a garden show, the clue's in the name. Monty Don thought this wasn't a garden. I mean, bless him, he's a fantastic presenter, but He apologised actually after he said it, by the way, to the designers. And I know that because I saw them recently at a conference and they told me that. But, you know, if any of you have got any room for beavers in your garden, well, just get in touch with the Wildlife Trust. We can do it. And let's move on to hard landscaping now. This is a scene in London, not far from Chelsea Flower Show, actually. I took this on the way home same year. And it's about 95% hard landscaping, which you kind of understand for London. But when you sit in a client's garden, you kind of think, there's too much hard landscaping here. There's not enough permeability in the surfaces. Where's that water going to go? And you'd be surprised at how many people drain their rainwater into their wastewater. Why do you think all those sewage farms are flooding? It's just so much easier sometimes for builders and contractors to say, oh, we're doing a bit of extra work here. Won't tell anyone. If it's okay with you, we'll just connect that up to the wastewater supply. Goes straight to the sewage farm. They can't cope with it. And that goes into our seas and our rivers. Yeah? All been reading about this recently? Yeah? So the rule is to try to stick anyway, to 80% soft landscaping, 20% hard landscaping. Just a general rule. That's all it is. Maintenance. Do we have to mow our lawns? Everyone know about No Mow May? Okay, asking questions if you don't. Basically, tidiness is the enemy of biodiversity. But hey, I like beautiful looking, neat gardens as well. But just try and keep a bit or a few bits, or even, you know, if you're going to have beavers. I mean, you're going to have beavers in your garden now, aren't you? I know that, yeah, of course. But, you know, try and keep a bit of it for the wildlife, okay? Very, very important indeed. And, you know, just a general tip on maintenance. And again, you know, I'm drawing Verity in again here. Apologies, Verity. But, you know, we can talk about maintenance and, you know, maybe leaving flower heads over the winter for invertebrates and how important that is. So, no pesticides, no plastic, please. So lastly, we're going to quickly look at SUDs, sustainable drainage systems. That's what they are. They cope with drought, they cope with flood events, they don't overload the stormwater drainage, they infiltrate water. That's what happens at the surface. Underneath that, the water percolates down. We get aquifer replenishment. What are aquifers? Chalk-bearing rocks. What are chalk-bearing rocks in Hertfordshire? The place really where we get our fresh water from. Very, very important, this. And we can use water retention, so that's long term. There's a big biodiversity benefit there. We could just call it a pond really, couldn't we? And we can use water detention, which is temporary for flood alleviation. Just a bit of explanation here. So you kind of make the water that's running off the surface go into a pond, but you have an exit pipe. And you can determine the speed at which the water leaves that pond and goes downstream by the gauge of the pipe. A little pipe will let it out very slowly. So if you're in a flooded area, you can detain the water, let it out very slowly. Maybe that area downstream won't flood anymore. If you want to let it out a bit quicker, then you have just a bigger pipe. So it's quite clever stuff. You need to be good at maths. And back to the client in St Albans. Remember the walk-in bin store I showed you with that really nice insect home habitat on the end of the bin store? This is what their drive looks like. I couldn't show you the whole drive because it had contractors' vehicles over it building the bin store. But I took this just last week when I was there with them. And my goodness, when a client says, can we have a drive please that will replenish the aquifer? Wow. Isn't that collaboration? Isn't that connection? Isn't that engagement? So what we did, we took off their old drive. I'm afraid that went into a skip. We just loosened up the subgrade, as we call it. And then we used MOT type 3, which is a more permeable sort of MOT as the sub base than MOT type 1. And that supports the vehicles, then it's the right specification for supporting the vehicles. And then we put this angular gravel on, which kind of like locks together. This is 14 to 20 millimetre grade, all locks together so it doesn't move about. Have you all driven on pea shingle drives? They drive you mad, don't they? Because the tyres just push it all to one side, you know, and you have to rake it back. Well, this doesn't happen with angular gravel. I can guarantee that every single drop of water that falls in this drive will replenish your water supply. Nothing runs off into the road, okay? Nothing goes into the wastewater supply. This is information on SUDS from the Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Management. SUDS mimic natural processes. We're just helping the natural processes, that's all we're doing. SUDS build in permeable surfaces. They slow things down. They store things. They treat water that could cause damage. Planning policy actually requires SUDS to be delivered in major developments, but the developers diminish it right down to what's less than actually required. Partly because of that, and partly because SUDS are a relatively new thing, they also need to be retrofitted onto streets or public open spaces and other properties and stuff like that. Now I'm getting towards the end of my talk for tonight, but I just thought I'd point out, in answer to the question who is responsible for doing all these things we've been looking at tonight, I think that we're all responsible. So who are we? Well, we're this, that, we're that, we're that, we're certainly that. Aren't you lovely people? We're all of that. Wouldn't you just love it if Vladimir Putin woke up tomorrow morning, you know, chief warmonger in chief, and said, do you know what, I'm fed up with this war. Should we just make the world a better place? The deniers, the doomers, the bystanders. It is me and you, isn't it? But you know what? I hope you've really enjoyed my talk tonight, but there's always someone, isn't there, in this world who's a better communicator than yourself. So I'm going to leave the last word to this man. Can everyone read that okay? Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you very